Hey everybody, it's Fox with Foxio Games, and have you ever played a video game where you just felt like it set the standard in so many different ways for future games to come? I certainly have, and one of those games is The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt. I wish they had just stuck with the numbered title The Witcher 3 and not appended Wild Hunt to it, but they did that with the second Witcher. I don't know why, but this is a thing nowadays. We like to not only sequelize a title, but put a subtitle added to the title just to make it longer. Whatever. Like I said, I'm Fox with Foxio Games. We're going to take a look at The Witcher 3. This is my review. I have finished the game, put quite a lot of hours into it. I've done a ton of the side quest. Obviously, I haven't done everything, and I have not gotten to the DLC. Hopefully, I will in the future, but if you take a look at the date of upload of this video, and remember when The Witcher 3 came out, you'll see it sometimes takes me a long time to get around to my reviews. I put this one off because it was just such a massive game, but when I finally did get into it, I kept playing it, and playing it, and playing it, and I found it difficult at times to set it down. That's not something I face very often nowadays. In fact, more often than not, I find that I enjoy the video games that I play, but I almost have to sort of force myself to keep playing. I'll play for about 30 minutes, maybe 45, and feel like, okay, I'm going to set this down and come back to it, but I know if I do, if I set it down, there's a chance I'll never come back to it, even though I thought it was a great game. In the case of The Witcher 3, that just wasn't true. I kept playing, and I'm glad I did, because it was worth it all the way until the end. I felt like even the end was pretty good from start to finish. It's not absolutely perfect, but it gets close in a lot of different ways. But as always, let's start with a review of the PC port. I am happy to report that there are a ton of settings to play with here, and it should satisfy most people. Audio has the usual stuff, along with being able to change music effects and voice volume separately, so you can modify those to your liking, particularly if you don't want background music dominating. You have full rebindability on the keyboard and mouse, however with the controller, not so much. Now you can switch between the default control setup or a new control setup that was designed to get around one of the biggest complaints in the game, and that was the awkward control for Geralt, the main character in the game. I did end up choosing the new control scheme for him and played the majority of the game on my gamepad and Xbox One controller, although I did play, I think, about an hour or so with the mouse and keyboard just to make sure it works, and it does. Both work great. I prefer the controller for third-person action games. There are also some gameplay options you can play with, such as whether you want to manually draw your sword or have it happen automatically. I like the automatic option, turning off that little fisheye effect for your Witcher sense, which we'll get to later, changing the difficulty, and just a bunch of other things. Lots of options there. As for video options, there are a ton, thank goodness. You can modify the UI in a lot of different ways, turning stuff on and off and changing the size of it, which is great, because for those of us on PC, if we want to sit back on a couch and play with a controller from a distance, you want to make the UI larger, whereas if you're sitting in front of your monitor at your computer desk, you want the UI to be smaller so you can see more of the screen, because you're closer and you can see the UI just fine. You don't need it to be giant. You can turn off things like motion blur, regular blur, anti-aliasing, bloom, sharpening, ambient occlusion, depth of field, chromatic aberration, thank goodness, I hate that, vignetting, light shafts, bunch of options there, and are what are called post-processing. Unfortunately, only an on-off for anti-aliasing. That's very disappointing. Should be more anti-aliasing options and the ability to set different levels of it. The NVIDIA Hairworks, the NVIDIA GameWorks options, I highly recommend you shut them all off. They're terrible for performance, no matter what kind of card you have. But when it comes to most of the settings in the game, I had them maxed out or fairly close to maxed out, with a few things set to medium and some things turned off, just to make sure that my game played quite nicely. My goal is to have it be 60 plus frames per second at nearly all times, with no drops underneath. Even though I have a 144 hertz monitor, maintaining 144 frames per second is not going to be easy in most modern games that push the boundaries of what your graphics card can do. But even with most settings set fairly high, this graphics card that I have, the GTX 1080, was able to pretty much dominate the game, particularly for 1080p, 60 frames per second, and at many times I was over 100 frames per second. So I'm very satisfied. The performance is excellent. Compare that to the performance of the original Witcher game, which came out only on the PC. I played the Witcher Enhanced version, or Enhanced Edition, whatever it's called, and it actually performs poorly compared to The Witcher 3, even though the graphics are much simpler. So this is a game with much better graphics, performing much better at the same time. Very well optimized for the PC version, which is the only one we'll be looking at. Sorry, console players, but hey, you can get a lot of value out of the rest of this review, just not the PC port section. You can tweak it pretty much to your heart's content, but like I said, that lack of AA options for anti-aliasing, not a fan of that. Okay, let's just state the obvious here. The Witcher 3 has amazing graphics. I can't state that enough. It is one of the best looking games I have ever seen, just ever. And I'm not using any hyperbole. I'm not using any exaggeration. I've seen a lot of great looking games based on their art style, games like Okami, particularly Okami HD on the PS3. But this is a game that looks great while also pushing for that, semi-realistic graphical style. Technically, these are some of the best visuals you've ever seen in any game up to this point, and probably for a while. A lot of newer games have come out after The Witcher 3 and don't look nearly as good, especially considering how well the game performs. Of course, I do have a very powerful graphics card, but I've heard it works quite well on others, and I have played the game previously on my GTX 980 Ti, and again, another powerful card, but it worked quite well on that card as well. Trees, plants, grass, they all sway realistically in a really awesome fashion. It's hard to explain, but when you see that kind of wind effect of stuff blowing back and forth, the trees, plants, the grass and everything, it adds a level of realism that really draws you into the world, especially when a storm comes around and it's raining and there's lightning and there's thunder and then you see the trees just blowing all over the place. Then you go back and play other games where that stuff doesn't happen and they just feel a little dead in comparison. This game, through its graphics, really sets the environment. It really draws you in. Now, it doesn't make you feel like you're really there. It's not a virtual reality game. But as these trees sway, the light rays from the sun realistically shine through them. Like you can stop in a spot and sit there, and the tree will wave back and forth at the top, blocking and unblocking, obscuring parts of the sunlight, just like it would in real life. When you walk outside your house or apartment and see real trees and a real sky. Have you done that lately? I'm just kidding. That's a rumor that gamers don't get out of their houses, of their basements. I don't live in my basement, I promise. Light in general in the game is incredible, regardless of where the source is coming from, casting very spot-on realistic shadows for the most part. I was impressed. Shadow quality is something that can really, really hurt the performance of a game. So, if you're having trouble running this, I recommend you turn shadow quality down. You won't miss it all that much. Yeah, it's great to be super realistic, but I think I set shadow quality ultimately to like the medium setting, possibly even low at times, just to get better performance out of it. People have accused me of being a freak over all the most amazing graphics, but actually that's not true. What I really talk about is frame rate. For me, it's frame rate. Frame rate over visual quality any day. Weather effects are realistic to a near lifelike level. It's amazing. I just sat and would stare at it for a period of time. Like, say, I think I've spent maybe 20, 30 minutes just looking at scenes in this game, kind of just moving the camera around, getting a view of everything. It looks amazing. Day-night cycles are smooth and natural as well, with the sunlight casting appropriate shades of light and shadows, and the sunlight changes its color as it goes, from the rising sun all the way up to noon, all the way down to the setting sun. It is easy to forget at times that this is not a real world. Like, you can just get so drawn into it. You don't think you're there, but you almost start to think this is a real world here. These are real characters. We'll get more into the characters later. The game contains just some amazing vistas, as I've hinted to. Like I said, I stopped in my tracks countless times just to sort of sit and admire the view, and that's not really something I do very often in video games. It's not. Now, visually, if I had to complain about one thing, I would say that the anti-aliasing could use a bit of work at times. I felt like I saw some jagged edges. It's not bad at all, especially compared to a lot of other games, but I would have liked different options, like FXAA for performance, TSAA, I think it's called TXAA, TSAA, for better quality in performance, a trade-off. It would be nice for those of us with more powerful cards and more RAM and video RAM that is, to be able to choose between some different settings on that. And the other thing I would say, and this is something you can turn off, is that the little fisheye effect and the way that coloration, everything changes when you go into your Witcher sense. It did make it kind of annoying for me. I didn't like the way it changed everything so drastically. It zoomed in the focus. I just wasn't a fan of that. Not a big deal. Like I said, you can turn, well, at least one of those features off, the fisheye part of it. And when it comes to the sound and music department, not surprisingly, it amazes us there as well. The music is so good. It is incredible. It's atmospheric. It's thematic. It sounds epic in nature. I mean, like truly epic. Not just, you know, the way millennials use the word epic like they use anything else. You know, oh, I absolutely love tacos. They're the best in the world. No, not that kind of epic, you know, exaggerated. I mean, they give this grand scale, like this is something big. This game is huge. This game is epic. This game covers something amazing. It's bigger than the average game, and that is also true as well. It's worth listening to some of this music outside of the game. Now, it has been criticized because I think one of the key songs, like the combat music, was ripped out of like an old traditional wedding-themed song for some, I don't know, culture. But, you know, honestly, I don't care about that kind of nonsense. Only social justice morons worry about those kinds of things. You know, the idea they appropriated a culture's song and used it in a video game. They should be flattered. I would be if somebody appropriated my content and used it, as long as they didn't copy my videos. Music dynamically changes based on the situation as well, which is nice. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think that feature first appeared in Ultima Underworld. That's another game I'd love to eventually take a look at, but like I said, I just don't have time. I wish I had more time. I really do. The use of vocals in this game is pretty much just right. I mean, I never found it tedious or annoying to listen to anybody in this game. I can't think of a single character that bothered me because they sounded bad, or because they sounded forced, or because it sounded fake. Everyone just sounded good. I mean, yeah, some of the characters were a little bit over the top at times, but it was over the top in the sense that it sounded like a good Hollywood movie. You know, good quality movie script voice work from good voice actors. I guess now referring to Hollywood doesn't always mean quality, does it? The sound effects and sound engineering are excellent as well. When I talk about sound engineering, a lot of people don't know what that means. It is essentially about balance. Not only balance, but location. Where does the sound come from? Especially noticed if you have headphones on. Is it what do I want to say? Situationally, do you hear sounds to your right on the right side of the speaker if you have just stereo, you know, on the left, and vice versa and all that? Also, you know, can you hear the voices clearly over the music? Stuff like that. One of the big complaints people had about Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U is that the music was so loud, sometimes you could barely hear the dialogue, and you couldn't change it. That's not a problem here. It's great. Sound engineering is spot on, I would say about at least 98% of the time, if not 99% of the time. Combat effects are really good. They sound just right. Slashing things with a sword, hitting stuff with magic, casting your spells. It all sounds really good. It's powerful. It has an impact. It just sounds great. You know, there are certain games where things don't just pack the right punch. You know what I mean? Like when you shoot one of the guns, it just sounds weak, or when you cast a spell, it just sounds lame. This is not one of those games. Everything sounds great for the most part. I can't think of anything that didn't. There might be something that doesn't sound great. But, you know, even the atmospheric effects, like the water, the fire, the weather, they're all great. They all set the tone magnificently. Like I said, the voice work is stellar. Magic effects just sound magical and good without being overbearing. This is top of the line stuff. You know, I would argue that this is probably the best voice acting in any game I've ever played, and I think it even beats out Mass Effect, which was pretty good overall. Now, there are a few issues. The cinematics in the game. This is when it plays a pre-rendered video, basically. It's not rendered live in the game engine. This happens at times when it's loading, and a few other times in the game when there are special moments. The cinematics on my machine played at an extremely low volume. I had the game up loud enough to where I could walk out of my computer room, walk to the other side of my house, and I could just still barely hear it that far away. It was pretty loud in here. And the cinematic would come through so low, I could barely hear the voices in it. I had to read the subtitles to understand what was being said. So I don't know if that's just something about my setup. I have a pretty standard sound chip built into my motherboard. Shoot, off the top of my head, I can't think of what it's called, but most of you will know what it is. It's one of the most common. So it can't just be me on this. And very rarely I would notice that I didn't actually hear a sound effect that should have played. Now, it was rare, but it did happen, and I have two theories on this. Number one, it's just a little minor audio glitch, or number two, they were actually playing so many sound effects at the same time that perhaps it just dropped some of them for some reason. I don't think that's the case, but it could have been. Again, neither of these two small complaints are deal breakers by any means. The Witcher 3 has, without question, an amazingly good story. I mean, this is novel quality story, and that makes sense because they are based on a fictional novel series. I mean, the quality is equal to that. This is basically, I think, what you would get if you took a really good fantasy fiction novel and turned it into a video game. That is kind of what the Witcher series is. The world, the characters, the environments all feel pretty realistic and natural to the world that's been created. Now, there's two ways that I can use the term natural and realistic. One way is into the real world. And some say sports games try to be natural and realistic to the real world. They want the football or the soccer ball to go flying like a real American football or real soccer ball, and tackling to look real. In this game, it's not that kind of real world realistic. This is realistic and natural to the world that they've created. It's a believable world. You think it's real. Have you ever played, say for example, this is really common with Japanese games. You'll play like a Japanese role-playing game, and the character designs and the way they talk and the dialogue and the world, it just seems all like silly. It's so over the top silly that it's not even believable for what it is. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Has the fantasy world they've created inside the game, has it got this environment, this aesthetic, has it got this cohesiveness to it where it feels like it's realistic and natural to itself? And that is true here. The main quest is really good. It's interesting. It contains lots of choices, and it takes you through a lot of the world like a main quest should. But what really stands out here for a lot of reasons are the side quests. They are of stellar quality. I mean, many of these side quests, and I'm not the first to say this, I'm ripping this off from somewhere else I've heard it. I can't attribute it because I don't remember, but many of the side quests in this game are actually really better than the main storylines of many other RPGs. And for those of you that have played through The Witcher 3, you know what I'm talking about. Some of these side quests draw you in more emotionally, are just, they feel deeper, more significant than the main storyline of many other games that try to be something big and significant and just fail in comparison. That's what's so amazing about The Witcher 3. They didn't put garbage side quests in this game. There are a few fetch quests, but even those are good. I mean, let me give you just one example to highlight my point. There's a quest in the game where you're essentially supposed to get rid of this thing. I think it's like a wraith or something that's haunting this area. And you think, okay, I'm going to go over here, find it, and kill it, right? Not the case. I don't want to spoil this whole side quest, but essentially you figure out why this creature's here, why it's still haunting this area, the sad story behind what happened. You possibly find the original body. You have to get some items, go find somebody else. There's so much more to it than just, hey, there's a monster here, go kill it. And on the topic of there being so much more, there is a ton of lore behind just about everything in this game. When you encounter a creature, it's not just a random creature that somebody drew and threw into the game and gave some stats and said, here, fight this thing. A lot of them have deep stories behind them, significant stories, and you are, in many cases, given the option to not kill this creature, but to find some other way around doing that. Or you can go in, guns blazing, so to speak. There are no guns in the game as far as I know, but you can go in and do that, or you can find another way around. Now, no, this is not a pacifist game where you can play without killing anything the whole time, but that option is there for quests. It's nice to know that there are a lot of quests in the game that you can do in a variety of different ways, and some of the things you do in this game do significantly impact other things that do happen in the game, and that's always nice to see. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of any video game. Despite what some of the social justice warriors masquerading as game journalists would tell you, gameplay is the most important factor here. This is a fact. A game can actually have bad graphics, bad music, a lackluster or completely lacking story, and as long as the gameplay is fun, it will be moderately successful, at least moderately successful. You can all think of a video game that you enjoy playing that has a story that's just or you can all think of a game that you enjoy playing where the graphics are pretty blah or terrible even. We enjoy games for the gameplay primarily. At least most of us who call ourselves gamers do. If you're all about the story and that's all you really care about, you just want to get a good story, you're in the wrong medium. You really need to go read some books or watch some movies. This right here is a video game. Now at first, what I noticed was that the movement was really kind of clunky and awkward. It immediately reminded me of a game like Red Dead Redemption. One of those games where moving around was sometimes just a bit challenging and no one else seemed to notice but me, and I was thinking, am I crazy here? But I'm actually not, because so many people complained about it that they patched in a second control option, you know, the one I was talking about earlier. Now, it's still not perfect. It does feel a little awkward at times. Occasionally, I'll be like trying to walk into a building and just kind of get like stuck on the edge of the door frame or something. That does happen from time to time, but thank goodness you have so much more control than the original Witcher game. In that game, you couldn't jump, you couldn't hop down from ledges, you know, you had to run around things. They would put in these tiny little fences or bushes to block your path. For the most part, there are no invisible walls, for the most part. You can jump over stuff, you can jump down from heights, although you die really easily jumping down from heights. And you do have quite a bit of control over them. It is not perfect. It doesn't offer the precision of many other similar third-person action games, but it's not terrible, especially the new control scheme. Combat can be hit or miss at times, you know, pun intended. At times I feel like I really, really enjoyed the combat. It was really good. And, you know, at other times, you know, I just feel like it's a frustrating mess. Not terrible. I guess frustrating mess wouldn't necessarily be the right word, but I feel like I don't fully have all the control that I need to do everything I want to do in combat. The lock-on isn't always clear, and sometimes it just seems to break for no apparent reason, especially when I don't want it to. But, you know, you can change the difficulty to adapt to that. Now, about the difficulty. Here are where I have some complaints about the game. Don't let it ever be said that I just sit and gush on a game. I've seen so many people who release videos that they call a review, and all they do is gush the whole time and talk about how much they love it and mention nothing negative. The difficulty in The Witcher 3 is one thing I really didn't like. You'll be steamrolling through everything like no problem on, I think it's the normal difficulty setting, but then suddenly you'll encounter something and you will just get blasted into oblivion. I mean, it needed a lot better balancing in many ways, especially when you get to the boss type segments. A lot of these bosses, I mean, suddenly you would go from, yeah, I can defeat most encounters, no problem. I don't even need to worry about the alchemy stuff. I don't need to really heal up. All I need to do is just sort of dodge fairly well, use my shield magic ability, cast some fire, be halfway decent with the combat, and you'll get through it without dying. You may take some damage, you may get close to dying, but I would usually get through it. But then all of a sudden I'd encounter this boss, and holy crap. I mean, I would die and die and die and die, and I kind of like that I was being challenged now, but I feel like if you want to present that sort of challenge to me, you should have built that up to and leading to the boss. Not have all the other encounters be steamrolling along, no problem, and boom, the boss is a wall of difficulty you must overcome. In some ways it was fun. You know, I learned to make better use of my alchemy potions, whatever they were called in the game, concoctions, something like that. I learned to better dodge, but I wish I had to learn that on more of the enemies and not just the bosses. Now, onto some good stuff. Questing in this game, as we mentioned before, side questing is actually fun. It is fun to do side quests. You don't do side quests because you need more experience points or you need to level up and all that stuff. You do side quests because you want to. You will find yourself completing a side quest, getting distracted by them when you didn't mean to, because you're really interested in finding out what happens. And that's just something that you don't get in most games. And you know what's also really awesome? They're easy to keep track of, and they're really well organized via the in-game quest menu. The locations are usually clearly marked, and quest targets are generally easy to find, except when they aren't. Be prepared for some total confusion on a handful of these quests, as some of them don't mark the stuff that you're supposed to go after and don't clearly explain it either. But for the most part, it's clear. Now, some quests were just way too high level for you at the point that they become available, so I kind of feel like, why are you even offering me this quest at this point in the game? You know I'm not going to be even close to capable of doing it, but I did find myself accidentally handling a quest that was way too high level for me, and somehow I made it through. I think it had to do with the fact that I had like a sort of like a party member with me at the time. You don't really get party members, but this guy was fighting at the same time that I was fighting, and I sort of just kind of let him handle most of it and would swat the enemy, and it took a long time, but I actually did it. I mean, that is what it is. It's okay, I guess, to offer high-level quests to tell you to come back to an area later, but I found myself getting the quests, but then they would linger in my quest journal forever, and I just felt like I was never getting around to them. By the time I was ready for them, I'd kind of forgotten about them, and I'd been ignoring them for so long, I just kept ignoring them. Another little thing is that the game doesn't really explain the leveling process very well. At least it didn't for me. Like, it took me a while to realize how it all worked together and how you could, slot these things into these things and what skills benefit you with what other skills, what things are useful and what aren't, and how you can use them. This game is a lot more complicated than it looks like at first, and it was really easy for me to completely miss some big things that would really help me out because I just didn't notice them. I would say go through all the menus and really look at everything in there and figure out what you have and what you can do with it early on. That way, you don't get stuck on these bosses like I did, because I think if I'd known how to tweak everything better, I might have had an easier time. Here's a very specific thing, but this is something that really bothered me, is that the game, at least the way I played it, the way I was going through it, it had a serious lack of swordsmiths. Okay, I had no problem finding people to make armor for me, to get other items, what are they called, herbalists or whatever, but it was nearly impossible to find a swordsmith that could make me a decent sword at any point in the game. I found one really, really early on, and then the only other one that was really available, like fairly early on, involved this difficult quest, and I tried to do the quest line, and I failed it, and I think he was killed, and so he's no longer available, and I don't know if I ever found another swordsmith. Like, I was looking everywhere. I didn't want to look online, and, it's kind of like cheating. I wanted to play the game naturally, but there are definitely way too few swordsmiths in the game. They need a lot more. I mean, like 3, 4, 5 times as many as they have. So because of that, I spent a lot of the game using swords that were quite beneath my level, and so, again, that's what may have contributed to some of the boss battles being more difficult than they needed to be. Now let's get to some of the other nitpicky issues. There are way too many containers to loot in this game, and when I say that, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, you can walk into a single room that's not that large, and you can have 10, 15, or 20 or more lootable containers. And most of these things, like little boxes and bags and sacks and backpacks and all these other things, most of them contain like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 items. There are so many different things you can pick up in this game, and a lot of them don't add to your weight, but some do. And until I realized which ones added to weight, I was actually either dropping stuff that I didn't need to drop, or I was actually just not picking stuff up thinking, whoa, I don't want to weigh myself down. I think most ingredients have no weight, which is awesome, but that wasn't really made clear to me. I guess it didn't need to be. I could have just looked at the weight and seen that it wasn't an issue. But still, I mean, Let's narrow this down with these loots, these lootable containers, what I mean. There's way too many of them. You spend so much time looting containers. It's ridiculous. Now, if you like that sort of very specific, tedious thing in RPGs, then you'll like it here because there are just so many. But, it's also way too easy to accidentally ignite or extinguish candles and light sources while you're trying to loot these things. It's happening all the time. Like, you see a chest or a box or a sack, a backpack, anything like that. You go up, you press the button to loot it. Oops, I accidentally, cast ignite on a candle, or I accidentally put this torch out. Then you go to do it again. So I found myself having to walk away, walk backwards away from it, walk backwards towards it again, change the angle, fiddle with the analog stick a little bit, And it was just unnecessary. I don't know if there's an easy solution for that, but definitely way too many light sources in this game that are right in your way when you're trying to interact with something else. And another thing, this is both good and bad. There are lots of really cool effects that you can have on your armor and your weapons, but it can be difficult to figure out, to ascertain which one is actually going to be best for you, or even which one is going to be good for you. You could have all these benefits and find out that they really don't do a lot for you. And in that way, it became difficult for me to figure out what I wanted to wear and what I wanted to wield as a weapon, because I like, well, this one has 5 more attack power, but it's got all these other benefits. So I'm like, do these benefits outweigh the 5 attack power, or should I go with the 5 attack power? It's hard to figure out. I mean, leveling up does give you plenty of options for specializing your characters, so you could, in theory, go back through the game several times, changing it up a bit. I mean, it won't be radically different, but I think it'll be different enough to where you can actually conduct combat in a slightly different way. I mean, you'll still be using your weapons, but you might focus more on your magic skills, which I don't think they call magic. They call it something else in the Witcher skills or whatever they are. You know, assigning the mutagens and the bonuses is what I was talking about earlier. I just felt like it was unnecessarily obtuse. Let me give you a pro tip here. You'll notice that you can assign these mutagens to certain boxes, and the boxes are arranged in groups. If you put the same kinds of mutagens in the same grouped boxes, I guess it magnifies the effect, so it's better. So you don't want to just put them all randomly in there like I was at first. I mean, maybe that's my fault for not really paying attention, but that's definitely an area where you can fine-tune and optimize your character that you might not notice at first or at all. In fact, I just saw someone the other day on Twitter talking about how they didn't realize that a lot of the alchemy potions that you make are reusables. You restock them when you meditate. They thought they were one-time use things. So like me, at first they were ignoring them because I don't like to bother making potions and, oh, well, you used it and it's gone now. I mean, maybe health potions, but anything else would seem mostly useless. In this case, it's not. You can meditate just about anywhere as well, and that will restock your potions as long as you have the appropriate alcohol bases with you. Basically, yeah, you got to grab alcohol all throughout the game, and you use that as a base to restock the potions that you've made. So it is nice that you only have to craft the potion once, and then it's available forever at that point, but you've only got a limited number of uses for that potion in between meditation sessions. But, you know, what is strange is just how easy it is to meditate. You can do it anywhere. As far as I can tell, I don't even think it consumed a resource. I know in the first Witcher you have to use like a kindling resource, but I don't think it consumes any resource in The Witcher 3, other than if you want to restock your potions, that does consume alcohol resources. But I found myself able to even meditate when I could see a hostile creature in the distance, as long as they weren't actively coming at me. So I felt it was way too easy to do that. Restore all your health and everything. So to me, I feel like they should have made it a little more difficult to use your meditation because it is restocking everything. That way the game would have been a little more challenging in the right ways. But again, another thing that's sort of a two-sided coin, one side being good and one side being bad, is that there's a ton of variety in a lot of the things in this game. Combat, the way you level up your character, the kinds of potions you use, the armor that you wear, the weapons that you wield, and how you go about doing all of that, the quests that you want to complete and how you want to complete them and where and when, and you know, who you want to romance and who you don't, and all that it is easy to get confused, to get a bit overwhelmed, and to feel like there's so much to juggle you're not sure what to do. I mean, I wasn't sure which way I wanted to go with the story in a lot of ways, because well, if I do this, I might lock myself out of something really good, but I mean, maybe I'm locking myself out of something really good by doing the other thing. I felt like there was some confusing stuff in here, and it wasn't all explained the way it should have been. But I've been over that. I've said that before. Now, some people have complained that it was very glitchy for them. Granted, I did play the game when it was new, but I waited months before I really played through it. And by that time, I encountered very few glitches. Yes, I think like 2 or 3 times the horse got like stuck at a weird angle or was walking across the air or something, and I got stuck once, not on the horse. I saw a little bit of erratic movement every now and then, but it didn't really affect the experience much. It was extremely rare. Seriously, I think I can count the number of glitches like that I encountered on 1, maybe 2 hands, and only once did it actually affect the game where I had to reload because I got stuck in the environment, and I didn't lose much progress, thank goodness. Now, there's a ton more that can be said about this game, but this review is just getting way too long, and I can't tell you everything I liked or didn't like about it, but let's get to the verdict, and that is quite simply, as I've already stated, I blew this secret long ago. It's an amazing game. I loved my experience with it. I would like to play through it again if I only had the time, but I'd rather devote that to a new game I haven't played yet. Even when I thought the game was about to end, it just seemed to keep going and going, and I didn't mind. I mean, I literally thought I was at the end of the game, I think 4 or 5 times, and it kept going and going. The game was, I would say, probably twice as long as I expected it to be. And that was good because not at any point did I feel like, oh my gosh, I gotta keep playing this. You know, I get that feeling a lot with, say, like JRPGs that just go on and on. This game made it fun, it made it interesting, it kept things fresh, new things were happening. And there were some twists and turns. I mean, I'm not going to say it was a total, you know, twist ending or anything like that, but there were some changes throughout the game that kept me interested and kept things flowing nicely. I was interested the whole time. The relationships in the game felt real. And I mean, when it's all over, you'll feel as if you're actually saying goodbye to some real people that you've been adventuring with. I mean, you feel like, oh, it's over, you know, we got to say goodbye to each other now. The game forces you to make some difficult decisions, and because of how much you learn to care about the characters, those decisions will make you reflect upon yourself and why you chose what you did, and whether you should have chosen differently, even though it's too late by that point, unless you reload a previous save. But The Witcher 3 is just a superb, finely polished title, at least it was for me, you know, months after release, and it is well worth playing for any fan of RPGs in general. Yes, you could say it didn't have all the RPG elements it could have. You know, statistics and stats weren't in there. You weren't assigning strength and dexterity points and all that. But it is fun to play. It's interesting. There is variety in the combat, variety in the leveling process. So, ultimately, no serious fan of role-playing games should pass this one up. That is, if you're of sufficient age. Because, you see, something you haven't seen yet in this is that, and I'm not showing this because it's on YouTube and I want this to be friendly for people of all ages. This game isn't friendly for people of all ages. This is an adult game all around. And I really mean that. If you're a parent, do not let a young child play this game. You want an older teenager who's mature enough. And I really mean that. There's substantial nudity, sex, graphic violence, dark occult themes, drug and alcohol references, and just all-around gritty adult content. This is one of those gritty, dark fantasy games that should not be played by children, especially children that are not mature enough to handle that content. I would say you're looking, I would wait until maybe at least 16 or older. Definitely wait, because children should not be playing The Witcher 3. This is truly a game for adults, and mature adults at that. Alright guys, well, thanks for watching, blah blah blah, all that stuff. Subscribe, send me money, give me free money on the internet. Whatever else you guys want to do, follow Twitter, Gab, all that stuff. It's all in the description down there. I'd really appreciate if you do follow me on those other accounts. I enjoy interacting with you, and please say hi to me when you follow. Be like, hey, I saw this video and I followed you on Twitter. How you doing? And I'll respond, and probably I'll be nice. I am working on reviews of the previous Witcher games. I am about a third of the way through the original Witcher game, and I do plan on getting to The Witcher 2, so I hope you guys look forward to that. But that is the end of this. I mean, this video has gone on long enough. I'm Fox with Fox Games, and I will see you guys next time.